Seb Yeager here with a walkthrough for our musical endings in Filmstro version 1. So what we've done is we're now releasing over the coming days and weeks endings for every single track in our library that has endings. Some very few don't, but you'll get to find out about that as we release them. So what I'm going to do is show you how this then works. So if you have a piece of music which has an ending, and I've got one here for you to show you as an example, you will see two entries in the library. So here's a track called Olympus. That's our sort of vanilla version, if you like, the one you've been used to so far. That kind of repeats, and you can tailor to your edit no matter how long your edit is. Here's Olympus end. Now this number is very important. 1 minute 53 indicates when the ending comes to a conclusion. So to show you this, I'm just going to import a piece of footage that's definitely long enough to handle this. So as you can see, this piece of footage is just over 2.5 minutes long. So if I take Olympus end and put it in here, first thing you'll notice is that it's pretty blank. There aren't these kind of typical vertical beat markers, but there's a good reason for that. So if I just bring in the vanilla version quick just to show you the difference. So here is Olympus as before, with all the vertical beat markers and musical kind of divisions. And looking at this ending piece then, the two most salient points are the one at the beginning, which shows you where the original piece of music would have started, and then this is the most important one. This is your vertical ending marker. So first thing we're going to do is we don't want to hear any music after the ending, so we're going to just delete that out there. And now I have a piece of music that is distinctly got a beginning, middle and end. So that's fantastic, and all we need to do now is synchronize this ending to the edit that we're working on, and then after we've done that, I would suggest you would then go in and do the momentum, depth and power changes to make sure you get a perfect soundtrack. So let me just demonstrate that this is definitely an ending. So we'll just turn up the parameters a little bit to make sure you can really hear something in here. So just take the power, turn that up as well, and then I'll just go into the video volume and turn that down, make sure there's nothing we don't want to hear in there, and press play. Awesome, one ending right there. So you can move that ending around, of course, by using our sync functionality. You then just want to keep kind of trimming to catch up with yourself. If I show you a piece of music that I've created then in a proper demo using our ending functionality. So here again is the ending. You can see I've offset it by 30 seconds at the beginning because this 1 minute 53 is actually way longer than my edit. My edit's only about 1.5 minutes. The vertical ending line is here. I can show you it. It's just lurking out of shot. So this is the ending, and this is what it sounds like in this piece of music, in this footage then. Because I've gone to town and finished everything else, so I did a fade in to come in for the overall soundtrack. I then did some momentum, depth and power changes. I also had to do some kind of overall slight kind of manual ducking for some of the voice parts, and then this is what we end up with.
I'm not here to judge you, son.
The only other thing I'd say before we dive in and look at how we've handled musical endings for the Final Cut plugin and our Adobe Premiere plugin is to say that once you've synchronized the ending, in this case here I took this Olympus end track, put it in, synchronized my ending, and then I think if you make a note of this offset value, there's no reason why, for the purposes of creating all of your automation, you might want to work with the vanilla version of a track. So I would now go ahead and offset this by the same value, which was 30, I've actually forgotten it, was it 30 point something? Let's just, there you go, that'll probably do. That feels about right. And using this track now, knowing that we've already synchronized the ending in the Olympus end track, using this one, I just like seeing these vertical lines personally. So when I'm working and I wanted to make momentum and power changes, I like knowing where the strong beats are to make sure that, you know, it's not only is it sympathetic to the picture, but it's also sympathetic sort of musically. But that's just a personal preference. Once I've then done all of this momentum, depth and power stuff, I would then go ahead and bring in the ending once more, knowing that if I now synchronize that back to the 30 point, that is it. Let's have a look. If I zoom in, I dare say I get a little bit more control. There we go, 30.37, I think it was. Leave comments to set me right, I'm sure you will. There you go, that's the way we would work with musical endings in the standalone. Let's dive in and have a look at the Final Cut plugin now, followed by the Adobe one as well. So here we are in our Final Cut Pro X plugin, and the workflow for using musical endings in this plugin are slightly different, but very powerful in my opinion. So once you've got a piece of footage in your timeline, I'm not a video editor by any stretch, so don't take anything else from this video apart from the audio workflow, but I personally have just moved this clip to the right of my timeline a little bit just to give me room to play on the either side of this clip, and you'll see why in a minute. So the first thing we need to do is bring in a WAV. Now, importantly, make sure this WAV file is as long as the ending, or slightly longer than the ending indicated. In other words, in our scenario here, we're looking at 1 minute 53 seconds. Also ensure that this WAV is longer than the clip you're working on, or the scene you're working on, or whatever. So in this case, I'm working on this whole 90-second trailer. So I'm going to take this WAV, bring it into the timeline. I'll put it into the right at the beginning, and then I'll just trim it back to the end of this footage. So by selecting it, we can then go into our audio effects, and we can select Filmstro and drag that onto this WAV. I'll go ahead and close this. So with Filmstro selected up here, we'll go to the library. We will select the ending track we're working on. In this case, obviously for this demo, I'm looking at Olympus End. So I'm going to just click to select that, and then we can get rid of the library interface. So what I want to do now, this is very important, I'm going to set the parameters in Filmstro to something like this. So low momentum, a bit of depth and full power. What this is going to do when the waveform pre-renders through, it's going to be very visually obvious for me to see these main audio transients in a quite visual way, because there's not much momentum, but there's these strong power incidents every now and again. So I'm just going to wait for that to render through, and if I'm right in how I've set this up, then obviously around about, you watching this main time indicator, at about 53, 1 minute 53, around about here, we're then going to see this tail off, and we're going to see a musical end. Once we have that, there it is, we're then going to trim this back, same as in the standalone app. So here we then have a piece of music with an actual ending. We now holistically move this whole thing and synchronize it to where we want that to be in the footage, such as this. And now, of course, we can get rid of any extraneous audio material at the beginning, and then we would fade in. And only now would I go ahead and do all the kind of good stuff in terms of working on the Filmstro parameters, so things like the momentum, the depth and the power, to kind of really go to town on this piece. So let me just bring in a piece I did earlier, and we'll just demonstrate what that would look like in its finalized kind of state. Let's bring that over here. So there we have it, a fully automated piece of music with some power changes there, depth changes and momentum changes, and also some overall volume changes on the actual soundtrack itself, done within Final Cut Automation's sort of parameters. This is to duck this little speaking part, for example, which of course we can visually see. So I do really like this workflow. I think it's got a lot of advantages over the standalone app as well, and very interesting to be able to just see so much and have all this visual stuff represented. Hope that was useful, and we're now going to dive into the Adobe Premiere workflow. Okay, so here we are in Adobe Premiere, and the workflow to follow to use musical endings in Filmstro is as follows. So again, I'm taking as an assumption that you've already imported a video asset. Again, apologies that I'm not using any kind of pro functionality inside of Adobe. I barely know my way around, but this is to explain musical endings to you, so bear with. So what we need to do is set an in and out time for our audio as usual. Now, bearing in mind that the musical ending we know is 153 that we're dealing with here. We're going to select the beginning of the footage as our intro, and then we're going to navigate to roughly 153. So I'm just going to go slightly over to be on the safe side, and I'm going to set that as the out time. So now the editor can be populated once I've chosen a track. So let's go and find that track. It's an action conflict, and it's Olympus End. So we add Olympus to the timeline, and now the ending for this piece, I'm just going to set the inflection to something really obvious so we can really hear that ending. So we're just going to have a quick audition in here just to double check I'm right in terms of the length of this. So if I take the timeline, we're synchronizing the playhead with Adobe and Filmstro obviously. If I take this timeline to nearly the end and press play in here, we should now hear this piece of music end. Oops. Let's unsynchronize that for a second. Lovely, that was categorically an ending for this piece, and as you see it's pretty much towards the end of the timeline that we've determined with this start and end timeout, time in, time out. So the issue of course we have, as you might imagine, if I synchronize this playhead back up again with Premiere, then it's going to, the ending of this piece of music is going to be out here somewhere, and our edit obviously isn't. So the really simple fix, this is the inverse in a way of working in FCPX. In FCPX we moved the audio here because we are determining the editing workflow by the size of the audio clip. We actually then would want to move the edit. So if I move that edit to roughly there, I can then keep auditioning now until I've synchronized my ending. Let's see if I've got one that I've already done, and I can show you how that looks. But that's essentially it. You've got to find the ending audibly now in here, and as you can see this is about right. Let's have a little play actually. So I'm hearing it, then I saw it, which means I would probably like to bring that to the left a bit. Let's try that again. Nice. So if I open a session, so here is said soundtrack. Let's see what that works like. Now, again, importantly, as you can see, at the beginning of this soundtrack now, because the playheads are synchronized, we actually don't want any of this music, just as we did in Final Cut and in the standalone, we trimmed it. Now, because we've determined the length inside of Premiere to incorporate all this audio, we can't now trim this kind of visually. What we can do, however, is come to the same result by adding a master fade in here with the soundtrack volume, so that when it starts playing, you know, we don't hear it until the actual video kicks in. So if we have a listen to that. So that works nicely. Let's just check out the ending. Great. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to render this down, and then I'll show you the last step to just kind of really tidy this session up. Alright, so that's rendered down. So we're going to just take this audio, put it into our timeline. Now, of course, we can go right from the beginning, because that's now then going to hook up perfectly to how we've synchronized this piece of music. You can actually see that in this extra bit there, it's then caught up and got onto the next section. So as we did in the standalone and Final Cut, we're going to get rid of that slight excess bit of audio because we want it to end on the ending. We don't want anything else. We can now, of course, go ahead and trim this to tidy this up. And if you now wanted to, you could take all of this and, of course, move it on the timeline. The only thing I would say about that is if you wanted to go back and make any changes, the position that you've moved the footage to is important because you want to come back to that same position. However, if you're only making a small musical tweak and you're going to re-render, well, you're only replacing a WAV anyway, so the relative position of it on this timeline is actually irrelevant. So there you go. So I hope that's been useful, and you understand how we can use musical endings in Adobe as well, and FCPX is that's your workflow, and our standalone app, of course, if that's all you require.